Imagine a normal train ride that suddenly turns into a terrifying fight to survive. On a cold February night in 2007, passengers on a Virgin Train service were thrown into chaos when their train, moving at almost 100 miles per hour, went off the tracks. The sound of metal grinding and sparks flying filled the air, turning a peaceful trip through the English countryside into a deadly accident. What caused the train to derail at Grayrigg? Stay with us as we look at the shocking facts of that night, which changed railway safety forever. Grayrigg is a small village in northwestern England with about 242 people living there. It is a little over 3 miles east of Kendal and about 41 miles north of Blackpool. One of the UK's major railway lines, the West Coast Main Line, passes just south of Grayrigg. This track is important because it connects London to Glasgow and is used for both passenger trains and freight. In fact, it carries 40% of the UK's freight traffic. The railway, which is electrified and allows trains to reach speeds of up to 125 miles per hour, was built between 1837 and 1869. Even though Grayrigg doesn't have a train station, it has the Grayrigg crossover, a special set of tracks used during maintenance to move trains from one track to another. Train number 1, S83, was a high-speed service traveling from London to Glasgow, operated by Virgin Trains on a Class 390 Pendolino train. Introduced in 2002, these Pendolino trains, built by Alstom, are designed specifically for the West Coast Main Line. The train involved in the accident, known as the City of Glasgow, was a 9-car unit stretching about 714 feet long and weighing 466 metric tons, with seating for 469 passengers across 2 classes. On the day of the accident, it was carrying 105 passengers and 4 crew members. The Pendolino trains are notable for their advanced suspension system, developed by Fiat, which allows the train to tilt up to 8 degrees into curves, much like a motorcyclist. This feature, combined with the banked turns of up to 6 degrees on the West Coast Main Line, enables these trains to travel up to 20% faster than standard trains. While their maximum speed is 140 miles per hour, the limits of England's railway infrastructure restrict their speed to 125 miles per hour during regular operations. On the evening of February 23, 2007, high-speed service number 1 S83 was traveling at 96 miles per hour towards Glasgow. The train, driven by the experienced Mr. Black, was just crossing the Docker Viaduct west of the Grayrigg crossover. Suddenly, as the train left the viaduct, the front car was violently jolted upwards, a moment Mr. Black described as the train taking off. This marked the beginning of a catastrophic derailment. As the train hit the crossover, the leading car's wheels were thrown off the rails and down an embankment, digging into the wet soil. In seconds, the front car rotated 170 degrees and crashed against the next car, causing both to topple over. The first car detached and came to a stop, while the following 2 cars skidded on their sides before losing momentum. The impact forced the rest of the train off the tracks, although the last 5 cars remained upright, with the very last car almost aligned with the tracks. Despite the train's designed safety features, which mostly preserved the car's structural integrity, 2 passengers were ejected as their car rolled. In total, 90 people were injured, 31 severely, mostly from being thrown against or struck by flying objects inside the train. As the train cars derailed and came to a stop, the lights inside went out, leaving passengers in darkness beside the rail line. The first emergency calls were made from within the wrecked train moments after it halted. Quickly, the situation escalated, and within an hour, over 500 rescue personnel, along with dozens of vehicles and helicopters, including units from the Royal Air Force, were mobilized for the rescue. The remote location of the crash, narrow access roads, and muddy fields complicated the rescue efforts as evening turned to night. Local farmers assisted, using quad bikes, tractors, and 4-wheel drives to help transport rescuers and equipment or to pull stuck vehicles from the mud. Survivors not needing immediate hospital care were taken to Grayrigg's primary school for shelter and safety. Meanwhile, helicopters and ambulances transported the severely injured to hospitals. The strong construction of the Pendolino train cars, which remained largely intact, was later recognized for preventing more severe injuries and deaths. However, amidst the chaos, an 84-year-old passenger, Miss Masson, tragically lost her life due to injuries sustained in the derailment while being airlifted to the hospital. She was the derailment's only fatality. Immediately after the derailment, investigators rushed to the scene, gathering crucial evidence including the train's data logger. They began searching for clues to why the train derailed at such an unexpected location. Sir Richard Branson, chairman of Virgin Group, visited the crash site the next day. He spoke to the media, praising the train's driver, Mr. Black, as a hero. Despite the initial jolt that eventually led to the derailment, Mr. Black stayed at his post, trying to manage the situation instead of fleeing. Mr. Black later explained that leaving his controls never crossed his mind. His duty was to assist his passengers. During the derailment, he was thrown from his seat and knocked unconscious. When he regained consciousness despite his injuries, he used his personal cell phone to contact an off-duty colleague. He instructed him to alert Virgin Trains about the derailment and ensure that train traffic on the line was stopped. Sir Richard also highlighted the robust construction of the Pendolino train, likening it to a tank. He noted that the outcome could have been far more devastating had the train been an older model. The investigation into the derailment quickly ruled out any fault with the train itself and found no evidence of wrongdoing by the driver. Instead, attention turned to the tracks. Investigators discovered that the set of points at the Grayrigg crossover, identified as Point 2B, was in a severely deteriorated state. This damage, they determined, was not caused by the derailment, but was likely the cause of it. To understand the issue, it's essential to know how railway points work. At a set of points, the outer rails split to allow trains to either continue straight or turn off onto another track. A pair of movable rails, known as the switch rails or tongues, sit between these outer rails. These switch rails can move left or right, controlled by a motor based on signals from a signal box. When positioned correctly, one side of the switch rail aligns with its corresponding outer rail, creating a smooth path for the train wheels. The other side remains separate, leaving enough space for the wheels to pass safely if the train needs to continue straight. Given the critical role of these points, the deteriorated condition at Point 2B was significant. Investigators carefully documented the state of the points before removing them from the site for further examination in a lab. To maintain the correct alignment of the switch rails on a railway track, they are connected by 3 sturdy steel struts called stretcher bars, along with an additional locking stretcher bar. These bars are designed to keep the switch rails properly spaced, even as trains exert force on them during turns. The locking stretcher bar specifically reinforces this structure and transmits movements from the point's motor. However, during the investigation at the Grayrigg derailment site, it was discovered that these crucial components were compromised. The switch rail was found misaligned, too close to one rail and too far from the other. This misalignment was traced back to shocking failures in the stretcher bars, which were not caused by the derailment itself. The first locking stretcher bar wasn't bolted to the switch rail at all. The first regular stretcher bar was disconnected, the second was missing entirely, and the third had fractured and separated. Further, most of the hardware that should have connected these stretcher bars to the switch rails was found scattered in the ballast below. This severe oversight in the maintenance of the switch rails at Point 2B was a critical factor in the derailment, highlighting the importance of regular and thorough track inspections. Further investigation revealed scratches on the fixed outer rail and impact marks on the left-hand switch rail, which provided the final clues to the derailment's cause. These signs indicated that Train 1 S83 had collided with the misaligned switch rail, causing the violent jolt that Mr. Black described as the train taking off. While investigators confirmed what caused the train to derail, the reason behind the switch rail's misalignment remained unclear. Most of the missing hardware critical to the rail's alignment was found near the accident site, suggesting it hadn't traveled far. However, one bolt was never recovered, despite an extensive search of the area. Notably, one of the bolts from the locking stretcher bar was discovered wedged between the left-hand switch rail and the outer rail. This bolt showed signs of damage, and its position indicated that the switch rail had moved and repeatedly squeezed it prior to the derailment. Upon examining the bolt, investigators noticed that the wear and damage increased closer to the bolt's head. This matched their theory that the nut had gradually loosened due to the vibrations from passing trains, eventually causing the bolt to fall out and the locking rail to detach from the stretcher bar. The first permanent stretcher bar broke where it connected to the isolating bracket on the left-hand switch rail. Since the break was free of corrosion, investigators determined this failure had happened just a few days before the derailment. The hardware from this bar was poorly secured. One fastener was missing, and the other was so loose it could be turned by hand. More parts from this assembly were found loose in the ballast below. The second permanent stretcher bar was entirely missing, leaving only a rusty outline and some loose bolts where it once was. Parts of this bar were found over 164 feet down the track, and analysis confirmed they belonged to the missing bar. The investigation into maintenance practices uncovered significant shortcuts. Workers often used standard wrenches instead of torque wrenches required to ensure bolts were properly tightened. This likely led to insufficient tightening, making it easier for the vibrations of regular rail traffic to loosen the bolts completely. The investigation also revealed issues with the third and final permanent stretcher bar. Although it was in its correct position, it had broken in two places and was missing an isolating bracket, rendering it ineffective. Additionally, the other bracket had detached from the rail, further compromising the bar's functionality. Investigators concluded that all the stretcher bars suffered from excessive fatigue, leading to a systematic failure. They determined that the failures occurred in reverse order. The third bar's right-hand bracket detached first due to loosening bolts, allowing the rails some unwanted movement. This change put extra stress on the rails when a train passed over, causing the already weakened third bar to break. This sudden shift in load forced the second bar to handle more stress than it was designed for, leading to its detachment. The first bar, already weakened, along with the adjacent locking stretcher bar, then failed completely, severing the connection between the two rails. In a tragic twist, the investigators theorized that the locked position of the bolt, keeping the rails 22 millimeters apart, created a narrow gap that caused the train to derail. If the gap had been wider, the train might have stayed more aligned with the track, potentially reducing the severity of the accident. However, with the faulty setup leaving the switch rail neither fully straight nor turned, the train was inevitably pushed off the tracks and down an embankment, where the cars overturned in the soft soil. The report concluded that the Grayrigg derailment was caused by a severely worn set of points that had not been replaced due to inadequate maintenance protocols. Initially, the investigation's preliminary findings had identified the failure of the stretcher bars before the accident occurred. Once these findings were made public, Network Rail, the organization responsible for the UK's rail infrastructure, responded with a statement from its chief executive, Mr. Armitt. He expressed devastation over the findings and apologized for the maintenance failures that led to the accident, extending his sympathies to everyone affected. Just 2 days before the derailment, Network Rail's new track measurement train, NMT, had inspected the site. Known colloquially as the Flying Banana due to its bright yellow color, this specialized maintenance train is equipped with advanced testing gear, including lasers, gyroscopes, and accelerometers. It assesses track conditions by measuring parameters such as gauge, alignment, banking, and distortion. The train also has cameras to record the tracks and overhead catenaries. The introduction of the NMT was a direct response to the 2000 Hatfield derailment, which resulted from a broken rail that had not been detected in time, leading to a tragic accident that claimed 4 lives. During the investigation into the Grayrigg derailment, 3 Network Rail employees were arrested, including Mr. Lewis, who had openly criticized the use of NMT trains for inspections. Mr. Lewis, present at the crash site soon after the incident, recounted in a 2017 interview the grim expectations he had upon seeing the wreckage. Despite multiple police interviews and no charges ultimately being upheld, the ordeal led to severe personal losses for him, including his marriage, home, and job. He acknowledged that while his losses were significant, they paled in comparison to those suffered by the derailment's survivors and the victims' families. The investigation ultimately did not pinpoint individual responsibility for the maintenance failures that led to the derailment. Instead, charges were brought against Network Rail itself in January 2012 for failing to maintain adequate safety standards. Network Rail admitted guilt and was fined approximately £4.1 million in April 2012, covering both the fine and trial costs. Following the tragic Grayrigg derailment, an unexpected bond formed between Mr. Black, the train's driver, Mr. Lewis, the track maintenance manager at the time, and George Masson, the son of the accident's only fatality. They became friends, finding solace in their shared experiences. During a 2017 interview at the crash site, Lewis reflected on how this relationship helped them cope with the aftermath, appreciating that something positive emerged from the tragedy. Mr. Black, deeply affected by the accident, retired from train driving due to arthritis in a previously injured vertebra. He shared that the memories of that night remain vivid, especially on each anniversary. Similarly, George Masson described the anniversaries as challenging days, choosing to spend them in solitude to honor his mother's memory, which remains a significant presence in his family's life. In 2019, Virgin Trains' contract for operating the line ended and was taken over by Avanti West Coast, a Scottish-Italian company. As of fall 2022, the Pendolino trains, including the City of Glasgow, which was retired shortly after the accident in 2007, are being extensively refurbished. While most of the City of Glasgow was scrapped, the last two cars, which sustained minor damage, were initially preserved for training purposes at Virgin Trains Centre, though their current status is unclear. As we reflect on the tragic events of the Grayrigg derailment and the subsequent changes in rail safety and maintenance, it's clear that the impact of such disasters extends far beyond the immediate aftermath. What are your thoughts on the measures taken since the derailment? Do you believe enough has been done to prevent such incidents in the future? Share your views in the comments below and join the conversation.